Solicitation of prostitution. New law. What does it say? How does it affect you? Welcome to the Hampton Law Firm. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Today, I want to cover the ins and outs of Texas law as it relates to solicitation of prostitution. By the way, if you wait around to the end of this video, I'll also give you a free ebook, What to Do If You've Been Charged with a Crime in Texas. Now, many of you maybe have noticed, it wasn't all that long ago that they did this big media blitz locally here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas here about child trafficking and about prostitution. And the reason why they did that is because there was a change in the law effective September 1st, 2021. And it essentially completely changed the crime of prostitution. And I'm going to get into that here in just a minute, but many of you know the drill on this. So you've heard stories about it where essentially what happens is that vice officers have a tendency to want to conduct sting operations. And when they do that, they'll set up some kind of like setup, really, where essentially they will meet people in chat rooms, or they will put out an advertisement to make it look like a pretty veiled but somewhat direct idea that this is an advertisement for prostitution, hoping to get men, or what they call Johns, to be interested in this process and then to respond. And what they're essentially doing is leading them to a location for which to immediately arrest them. So this has been going on for a long time. But prior to September 1st, 2021, prostitution was a Class B misdemeanor. And that's the way that it was set up. It was punishable by up to 180 days in jail and up to a $2,000 fine. But Texas lawmakers became concerned is that there's been a lot of talk about human trafficking. And of course, everyone is against human trafficking and everyone is against sexual abuse. But there was a belief that if they were to make prostitution more punitive and to make it where someone is punishable in a much more serious way, that perhaps that would stop the process altogether and there would be no more of this trafficking or prostitution taking place. So as a response to that, there is a new law. Under Texas Penal Code, Section 43.021, there's a new crime of solicitation of prostitution. Here's what happened. Texas became the first state in the country to make solicitation of a prostitution a felony, punishable by prison time and to be potentially a convicted felon. Now, this new designation of prostitution was designed to target what they call Johns, which essentially mean is one who pays money or services to a prostitute for sex. And so, although paying for sexual services in many states is a legal act and is a legal transaction that is allowed to take place in many states in the country, it is not the case in Texas. So under Texas Penal Code 43.021, a person commits an offense of solicitation of prostitution if the person knowingly, and here's what's important, knowingly offers or agrees to pay a fee to another person for the purpose of engaging in sexual conduct with that person or another. Now, the offense of solicitation of prostitution has now been changed from a Class B misdemeanor to a state jail felony, punishable by a minimum of 180 days in jail and up to 2 years in prison and up to a $10,000 fine. So it's important to remember that you can still be charged for solicitation of prostitution even if there was no actual exchange of money or other payment if no sexual conduct takes place. In other words, here's what's important. Merely asking or contracting to make the exchange of money for sex is sufficient for the police to arrest you for the crime of solicitation of prostitution. Now, I mean, think about this for a second. Pretty amazing. No sex takes place, no money changes hands, but if there's an agreement to do something in the future, then it's a felony. Now, I'm just telling you that's the way the state of Texas set this up. That's the way the law is currently going to be put in place and enforced effective September 1st, 2021. So listen, I mean, some people say, well, why does it matter? Look, it is true that a state jail felony is the lowest level of felony in Texas, but you don't want to be a convicted felon. You don't want to face the possibility of going to prison. You don't want to face the possibility of having a conviction, a felony conviction on your record, which would make it much more difficult for you to be able to obtain gainful employment. And you just don't want that stain on your permanent criminal record where you are a convicted felon. So let's talk for a few moments about a few of the solicitation of prostitution defenses. What are some ways that you can understand, ways that you may be able to defend your case if you or a loved one is facing this type of charge, right? What can you expect? Well, one of the areas that we see that happens, and I will tell you, law enforcement will sometimes walk the line on this, is the defense of entrapment. Entrapment is one of the most common defenses to consider when you look at the crime of prostitution. Not so much for an actual prostitute that is engaging in a contractual service with someone else. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the sting operations. Okay, that's where there's a lot of baiting and kind of enticing going on, trying to draw people in. So undercover police officers take their sting operations too far on occasion. And it's just the reality of it is everyone makes mistakes and takes things too far sometimes, and the police are no different. They'll do it as well. For example, we saw a situation where someone was initially having a conversation with a woman that led to an invitation to meet at a hotel to talk and discuss the prospect of sex. Even though there was no direct agreement to make an exchange for services, when the client arrived, the two sat down on the couch. They began to spend time talking quite a bit. From the video, you could tell very clearly that our client was very uncomfortable, very unsure about what they wanted to do. And so he actually stood up and started to walk towards the door and said he had changed his mind. He didn't feel comfortable moving forward with things. So what ended up happening was the undercover officer, the female undercover officer, approached him and began to guide him back to the couch, began to rub on his leg, began to say, it's okay, everything's going to be all right. And that became a really big problem because to lead him back to where he was, to then now show that he was abandoning the alleged allegations here of potential prostitution, now the actions by that undercover officer were leading him to commit a crime he would not otherwise have committed. And that's extremely important to understand. That's essentially what has to be proven in order to establish the crime of solicitation. Now, that was considered in this situation, and of course, you know, when you have a situation like this, you're going to have a prosecutor who's probably not going to be very interested in pursuing this type of case whenever they have that defense. In fact, now that solicitation of prostitution is now a felony, every solicitation of prostitution case must be presented to a grand jury. So if you hire an aggressive and experienced criminal defense attorney, they're going to be able to take this information, determine what defenses may apply to your case, and perhaps provide an evidence packet to the grand jury. That grand jury could potentially no-bill your case if it turns out, and what is a no-bill? Let me step back. A no-bill is you're exonerated. You're cleared. You did nothing wrong. It's the equivalent of a dismissal, okay? If it's determined that the police overstepped their bounds or one of these other legal defenses applies here in just a moment, you don't want to miss out on the opportunity of making sure that grand jury knows what's going on, because the grand jury works a lot like a water filter. Think about it. A water filter is designed to keep bad stuff out and allow the good things through. Well, the Constitution sets up the purpose of a grand jury to only let cases, felony cases, flow through that have merit. Those that don't have merit should be excluded from the court process. But a lot of times it doesn't work that way if the grand jury doesn't get a chance to hear your side of the events or get a chance to see the mistakes that the police may have made, okay? So that's very important. So that's defense number one, is entrapment. Defense number two, no criminal intent. Remember, the state of Texas must prove the element of criminal intent beyond a reasonable doubt in order to be convicted of solicitation of prostitution. Now, what if you were to start a conversation with someone and it becomes sexual and the discussion leads to an exchange of money for sexual favors? What if you initially listen to the suggestion, you consider it, but then act uncertain if you want to follow through? Maybe you even agree to meet up, but you don't actually say, I'm going to go forward with this. Let's just talk about this more. And you continue to act hesitant through the process. You don't claim to whether or not you're going to be able to come up with the money or even bring any money. And then at the very last moment, the police rush out to arrest. Okay? Now think about this for a second. This does happen. You never exchanged money. You never even verbally agreed to the exchange of money for sexual services at all. Is this the crime? Is this sufficient to prove the crime of solicitation of prostitution? Well, there could be a very good argument by your criminal defense attorney that that element cannot be proven. Certainly, there may be reasonable doubt. There may have been discussion, but there may not be anything specific, whether it's text messages, phone calls, whether it was anything else that's out there. All of these things should be recorded if it's an undercover process that's going on, if it's a sting operation. If that information is not crystal clear about an exchange, an agreement for those services in exchange for money, you may have a very good argument that criminal intent cannot be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And finally, listen, when we talk about this, people say, well, what if I picked up a charge prior to September 1st, 2021? Well, prior to September 1st, 2021, you would be charged under the Texas Penal Code as just a regular prostitution charge. And so if you think about it this way, under the old Texas Solicitation of Prostitution law, a person commits the criminal offense of prostitution if he knowingly offers to engage, agrees to engage, or engages in sexual conduct for a fee, or solicits another in a public place to engage with him in sexual conduct for hire. So legally, the crime of prostitution is established whether the actor is to receive a pay or fee, or whether the actor solicits a person to hire him or offers to hire the person solicited. Now, the best news about this is this, and this just tells you how crazy it is. Prior to September 1st, it's a misdemeanor. You cannot be a convicted felon. You cannot go to prison. But magically, after September 1st, because of what's been put together by the legislature, you could have committed a crime September 1st or September 2nd, and it's a felony. You could have committed it August 30th, and it was a misdemeanor. That's basically what we're looking at right now. So the good news for you is if you picked up this offense or your family member picked up this offense prior to September 1st, 2021, you are looking at a misdemeanor charge. It doesn't mean it's not important. You do not want a prostitution conviction on your record, but it's better to be fighting a misdemeanor than it is a felony, okay? Finally, I want to talk to you about Texas Penal Code Section 43.03. This is called promotion of prostitution. A person commits the criminal offense of promotion of prostitution if acting other than as a prostitute receiving compensation for personally rendered prostitution services, he or she knowingly receives money or other property pursuant to an agreement to participate in the proceeds of prostitution, or solicits another to engage in sexual conduct with another person for compensation. So this is a Class A misdemeanor, okay? Solicitation or promotion of prostitution is a Class A misdemeanor, punishable in a Tarrant County jail by up to 1 year or up to a $4,000 fine. So I say all that to say this. Look, obviously, no one is a fan of trafficking or people being sexually abused. But I do think it's interesting that of all the states in our country, Texas is the first to make prostitution a felony. And so one of the things that will happen is someone might have made a mistake, but it doesn't mean that means that they should be a convicted felon. Even if there was a lapse of judgment, you need to make sure and protect your criminal record. You want to protect your freedom and make sure that you still have a future in order to take care of what's important to you, which is your family and your future. So listen, if you or a loved one are facing a solicitation of prostitution charge, don't hesitate to contact the Hampton Law Firm at 817-877-5200. We'd be happy to go over with you, give you a free case analysis, give you a free consultation, particularly if you're facing these charges in the North Texas area. That's kind of where our home base is. We'd be happy to answer your questions. And I promised you if you waited around till the end of this video, I would also give you a free ebook, What to Do If You Have Been Charged with a Crime in Texas. Click the link below and put in your information. We'll be glad to send that right over to you. I hope you have found this video to be helpful. Maybe it's giving you some clarity about recent changes in the law. And if you did enjoy it, like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll send you more great content just like this. Okay? Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.